now look to Kaleem Hawa, Lincoln College, to open the case for the opposition.
When I awoke on the morning of October 22nd, 2014, I wasn't feeling particularly patriotic. Tired, yes. A little grumpy, sure. But patriotic, not really. I mean, very few people begin their day with an outright reaffirmation of their undying love for country. I usually start it with a coffee. But on that day, a gunman stormed the Canadian Parliament buildings in Ottawa, in an event that was too similar to the horrors on Westminster Bridge earlier this year. And it's a day I will never forget. We stood or sat enraptured, staring at our screens, watching the chaos unfold all around us. And as I stand here before you, the minutiae of that event may have dissipated into my memory. But ultimately, it has been replaced with a resolve, with an anger, with this feeling that you can't quite shake. And the question is why? Why, if we are a smattering of disjointed people living our lives in utter, not glued to our screens, not interested in the rest of the world around us, if we are a collection of people who could not care about others, then why do we feel that attack as if it is something directly imposed on us? Why do we feel it as if it is an attack on our very selves? And I submit to you that it is because of love for country. You'll notice the proposition did a very smart thing today. They tried in that opening speech to conflate patriotism with virulent, incandescent nationalism, the likes of which have flashed across our modern geopolitics. But patriotism and nationalism are very different concepts. While patriotism is about loving your country and tends to be iterative over time, nationalism is about expressing the superiority of your country over another. It is a snapshot that ossifies national identity into something absolute, something static. And it is from that bitter nationalist fruit that the seeds of bigotry are sown. And so being against patriotism is like being against candles because occasionally things catch on fire. Nationalism is divisive and ugly, but patriotism can be empowering and transcendent. Nor was it quite fair for the opposition to characterize patriotism as something unthinking or uncritical. Real patriotism is about saying, yes, we love our countries, but we love them flaws and all. That one can love Britain and acknowledge the damaging legacy of its colonialism. That one can love America and still want to be a catalyst in the fight against injustice. That one can love Canada and acknowledge the disproportionate use of government force on Indigenous peoples in our country. These things are part and parcel of the definition of patriotism and is what we need to adopt if we are to be truly critical and reflective of its legacy. Today, I want to talk about patriotism as a duty to community and to country, and as one of the potent forces driving progress and innovation in an increasingly divisive time. I want to talk about patriotism as a means of unity for marginalized groups pursuing justice, and I want to talk about patriotism that empowers immigrants, new residents, and refugees alike by generating a more inclusive definition of citizenship. But before I continue in that regard, it falls on me to introduce the proposition speakers in this debate. Josie Dallas is a first-year PPE student, hailing from Magdalen College and an elected member of the Oxford Union's Secretaries Committee, which, as I've learned since coming to Britain, is just a boring way of saying that she's posh. Joking aside, I'm very proud to call Josie a friend, and I can think of very few people I would rather have on the aisle opposite to me. Josie Dallas, everyone. Mr. Stephen Hale is our second speaker. Mr. Hale is a man whose career is beyond reproach. He is the chief executive of Refugee Action, a group committed to assisting and advocating on behalf of the rights of immigrants and refugees to the United Kingdom. I hope you will join me in thanking him for coming tonight and lauding him on the vitally important work that he does in service to this nation. As you can see, it was very easy to write the bios for this group. Continuing on the theme of unimpeachable speaker credentials, Major General Jonathan Shaw is our third debater tonight. A decorated military veteran, Major General Shaw's service to his country has extended to the theaters of combat as diverse as Kosovo, the Falklands, and Iraq. We are very lucky to have him, and I look forward to hearing his reflections tonight. Mr. President, these are your guests, and they are most welcome. To love your country is to want it to be better. To truly love a country is to say that we, as educated citizens, cannot and will not accept an erasure of the past, nor an apathy of the present. The proposition in their speeches have tried, and inevitably will try, to burden our side with defending the likes of Trump and Farage and Le Pen. But let's be clear, those who couch their hatred in the language of obligation to the state miss what exactly it means to be an engaged citizenry. Those who claim to love their country, but do so with ignorance of its history, fail their own premise. Farage and Trump and Le Pen, these are not patriots, these are ideologues. Nations are constantly evolving, atoning for the mistakes of the past. Edward Said, in his beautiful Reflections on Exile, laments the myth-making that becomes the nation-state, that we, quote, retrospectively and prospectively characterize a history selectively strung together in narrative form. And this is exactly the point. In many ways, patriotism is a myth. Patriotism is a construct. If a nation is an imagined community, then patriotism is its collective story, its living will. If we view our nation as a project, we therefore become stewards of that project. We become invested in that project. No, thank you. In fasting a nation narrative, we tap into a forward momentum that is the essential story we tell ourselves as a society, to mobilize people, to strive for better, to galvanize activism, and to give back to our communities. I think, therefore, that patriotism has united our nations towards many of the greatest investments in science, in technology, in public aspirational social works projects, and in education that have withstood the tests of time. Why did Americans go to the moon? What spurred Martin Luther King, an avowed patriot, to write his letter from a Birmingham jail? Was it not love of country? Was it not a belief in wanting said country to be better? From all of this to have been accomplished, people needed to feel united by their nation. They needed to feel that their lives were part of a meaningful narrative. Patriotism does that. There are, of course, those who reject the premise in its entirety. Why, they argue, should we feel any positive obligation to our country if it is, as you claim, a construction? But this is the type of post-structuralist nonsense that critical theorists use to reject duty to country, service to community, and a commitment to the public good. These things aren't boring relics of the past. Our citizenship affords us a security and stability with the state as our guarantor. And as recipients of these privileges, it then falls on us to protect and advocate on behalf of those the state has failed. This is the entire basis of the social contract. And so our next inevitable question becomes, unity at what cost? Maybe patriotism has driven some of the great victories, the great innovations, the great investments and civil rights successes of the last century. But can it be justified if it means erasing the stories of those the state forgets, for those who are persecuted amongst us? What do we say to them? Can they ever be included under this definition of patriotism? And on this, I submit to you the inexhaustible Danielle Belton, writing about the structural injustices faced by African Americans in the United States and how her family views the question of patriotism. Quote, "You can be a patriot who doesn't want that made in Taiwan flag on their lawn. You can love someone who hates you." In 1965, hundreds of black people gathered on the Edmund Pettus Bridge just wanting to be heard, even though they knew there was a real chance they'd be taking their own lives into their hands. She continues, quote, "They did it anyways, out of love for America's unique ideals that sounds so good on paper. Let's all take a billy club to the head for love, to prove that we have the same rights and protections as all the citizens America purports to love," end quote. Is there a more patriotic experience than loving your country so much that it hurts? So much that you fight to improve it even in the face of the injustices it inflicts on you and your family?
On that point.
To protest, yes, go ahead.
So what's it perfectly legitimate and admirable to advocate a collective project to improve the country? I posit that when this project is then used at detriment, either through sport, or through policy, or through war of other countries, that is when patriotism divides us more than it unites us.
But what you've missed is that, like all concepts in society, they are used by people for their own ends, right? To blame the way patriotism is used by politicians or by others seeking to divide us is to miss the entire point. That a patriotism in its raw and unedited form is something that we should aspire to as nations, and one that evolves to become more inclusive. And in fact, I argue that the definition of patriotism is one that can accommodate that type of diversity, and that's the point I'm trying to make here in this section. I've seen some of the great capacities for love and compassion mobilized under the name of patriotism. In the wake of the atrocities in Syria, for instance, Canadians from coast to coast opened their homes and their hearts to those seeking safety. In doing so, that long-standing national story was employed, that our country would be a place of refuge to those fleeing war, that people like my mother, a refugee from civil strife in Lebanon, could be welcomed for no other reason than our people were proudly and patriotically Canadian. But if you have caught what's happening here, is that over time, what we've done is we've created what started as an artificially constructed patriotic myth has actually evolved into a shared set of values and beliefs as a society. To be a patriot is therefore not about being a Canadian, but actually about acting like a Canadian. And that's where the evaluation changes. And I think that's where patriotism can really succeed and unite us. So we've talked about the people already here, but about how patriotism motivates them in their lives. But how does this affect those new immigrants from different backgrounds and cultural contexts? Historically, national identity was linked to race and to class. To be British was to be of white Anglo-Saxon ancestry, with little room for those new immigrants with colored faces and funny accents. Race was used as a barometer for inclusion in society, and to be white was to be a citizen, a lover of one's nation, but to be black or brown was to be an import, something to be tolerated, never truly accepted under the banner of national identity. What patriotism therefore provides is a new way of understanding membership in the state. Here was a love of your country that could be accessed on the basis of actions rather than immutable characteristics. It didn't matter where you came from, you loved your home, and that's what counted. Because of patriotism, those torn from their homes, from their families, from their lives, in pursuit of something better, have a new vocabulary. To the old question, why are you here? Immigrants have a new response. I am here because I love this country. And then to the question they ask themselves at night, what am I doing here? They have, once again, a new response. No, what can I do now that I am? There is power in those words. The great exiled Palestinian poet Darwish writes, "Restore to me the color of face and the warmth of body, the salt of bread and the taste of the earth." And to that, patriotism replies, "Let me try." And so there we are. Patriotism mobilizes countries towards some of the greatest investments in justice, in science, in technology. Patriotism transcends selfishness in times of division and struggle. But patriotism is not uncritical. You can be a patriot that loves their country sometimes. You can be a patriot that loves a country that doesn't love you back. You can be expansive in your pursuit of justice, fierce in your advocacy for good, and still believe the myth. This is how patriotism unites us. In fact, these are the duties, the obligations of being a patriot. Not to stand idly by, content with the trappings of the present, but to strive towards a better future and to stand on guard for those who need it most. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me. I'm very proud to oppose this motion.